Fruitful Living with Sissel Anderson, here on Morning Joy, where truth matters. Today is Wednesday, October 16th, the Wednesday of the 28th week in Ordinary Time. Of course, this is Morning Joy. Wyatt Goolsby here with you in for Keith Downey. And as we mentioned, we are talking with Sissel Anderson on a regular segment here, Fruitful Living. Sissel is joining us here from our North Texas office of the Guadalupe Radio Network. Sissel, good to be with you here this morning, talking a little bit about family and the importance of family and church context.
Yes, definitely. Good morning, Wyatt. It's good to see you, especially this early in the morning. Mm-hmm. I was walking into the office this morning, and I was not anticipating it to be as cold as it was. I say cold, like everyone who's listening not in Texas, like recognizes I'm saying cold from a Texan perspective. So It was a beautiful little gift that God gave this morning. It actually feels a little bit like fall. But yeah, I wanted to talk a little bit about the relationship that we have with each other and how that really helps us with our relationship with God. Because I don't know about you, Wyatt, but I grew up a lot of people talking about like, oh, you need to have a personal relationship with Jesus. You need to have this relationship with God. But then no one really explained to me what that meant. And I was very confused. And I was just like, okay, have a relationship with God. And I guess somehow along the way, it got very separated in my mind that the relationships I have with other people was so different from the relationship with God. And obviously, of course, there are some very big differences between my relationship with like my sister versus my relationship with God, because one of those people in the relationship with God is perfect in the situation and it's not me. And so there's definitely some differences, but it's still a relationship. And that means that it is a two-way conversation and that there are ways that God is going to be speaking to me. And there's different things that I can do to better my relationship with God. I don't know if you've ever struggled with this concept at all, if I'm just like, the cheese stands alone over here.
Well, I love that idea of the fact that it is a two-way conversation and that with any relationship, you do have to work at it. If you don't pray regularly, if you're not talking to God regularly, if you're not trying to talk to God regularly, you can drift a bit like you would with any relationship with a friend, with a family member. If you don't talk in a while, it does feel like there's that little bit of a distance. And so that does make sense to me. And so I'm thinking, therefore, that's why it's so important. Of course, for you, I'm sure you communicate regularly, if not daily, with your own sister.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting, too, because I think everyone probably has those friendships or those relationships in their life where they don't communicate daily. But, when they do see each other, they can pick right back up. However, and those are beautiful types of relationships, the ones that don't, rely on daily communication just because of the stages of life that you're in, and it just is not going to happen. However, you also probably those would not be the people that you're going to call on when something big happens, because they're not going to know the context of everything that's been happening in your life. They're not going to know, everything. And so when we're talking about our relationship with God, it's first and foremost, and he, first off, he's all knowing, so he does know everything, but there's this really special, it's very much important that we actually do take the time to talk about our day with him. And so, yeah, we talk about, you mentioned about how, like, if you don't have a daily contact with your family members, your relationship might have a little bit of problems. And I know that I can tell when you have like a friendship or a sibling or someone in your family, you just feel a little bit out of connection, and because you haven't been talking to them regularly, or you just know something's a little bit off. And it's kind of similar like with our relationship with God, is that we know when everything in our life just feels very heavy and I feel like I'm walking through mud spiritually, and then you're like, oh, maybe it's because I haven't spent some time talking things out with the Lord. And so I've come to put together a few tips that I found very helpful for kind of just better living out this relationship with God that has helped me a little bit. And one of the first things is something that a friend of mine brought up, which I thought was really beautiful, because I know it's a hard thing for some people. Some people really don't struggle with this at all, with the idea of being like, okay, well, unless we're in adoration and see Jesus in the Eucharist, we can't see, quote unquote, Jesus, or we can't see God. Mm-hmm. And that can be a little bit of a stumbling block when it comes to having a conversation with him. And my friend recommends that you always, you try, at least it doesn't have to be forever, but just experiment with choosing an image of Jesus, a painting, an icon, whatever it may be, and having that in your prayer time for a while. have a picture of Jesus. Yeah, Tim's got one in the studio there. Have a picture of Jesus there, and maybe even just spend a few minutes of silence of just looking at him and finding that, and then just being able to visualize and being like, I am talking to a person. I am talking to someone who actually responds. And that has been something that is super helpful. Again, there's so many different beautiful images of our Lord, thanks to the artists using the gifts that God has given them. You can find one that really speaks to you. So that would be like my first number one tip, is just having a visualizer. Again, you're not always going to maybe have it. You might be doing, sometimes, I'm a big runner and gunner prayer person sometimes, and it doesn't always, I have my dedicated prayer space at my house, but sometimes life happens and I'm doing it in my car, and I'm not going to necessarily have a picture of Jesus there. But it's a good little thing to try.
Well, Sissel, if I could just say, I think that, a lot of people can relate to that, because not all of us are necessarily prayer experts. We don't necessarily know how to do everything or enter into deep meditation within 5 seconds. Many of us are just looking for the basics. So I think that what you're saying is very relatable to folks out there, even if they just necessarily need a structured prayer like an Our Father or a Hail Mary. You don't have to necessarily be an expert to talk to God, just like you don't have to be an expert to talk to your sister. I mean, you don't think about it ahead of time of like, oh, what exactly am I going to say? What exactly are the words that I'm going to say? You can just talk to your sister. In some cases, you can just talk to God, or if you need something structured, that's there and written for you. So I think that's a great example of the fact that not all of us are perfect, and the fact that we need just sometimes just to be able to pray or just talk with God in our own way if necessary.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I think it's a massive roadblock for most people in prayer life. It's just being like, well, I don't know what I'm doing and I don't know how to do it, so I just shouldn't try because I don't want to mess it up. And that's a big thing we need to establish quickly. I can't even think of something where you can mess up prayer, because, there's a lot of people in the Bible who, were very upset with God, and maybe didn't speak super formally, didn't speak super, kindly all the time, because they were just going through so much, and they just were crying out to the Lord. And another thing is, I was just thinking, this is what made me think about this topic, was when I was thinking about how I relate to my friends and family. There's a lot of unspoken things that happen when you're in a good relationship with somebody. There's a lot of things where they just know you so well. And so because of that, they do little things like, one of my siblings or roommates might be at the grocery store and they'll see something that I like and they'll just buy it. And they won't even necessarily tell me like, oh, I bought this for you, but it just shows up at the house and you just know, oh, this is for me. It's just things like that. Or they know that you don't like something. Like I don't like sudden loud noises. It's kind of something that bothers me a lot. And so if we're out somewhere and my friend sees that, at the beginning, we were doing a 5K recently, they shoot a gun off, kind of like a thing at the beginning. And she goes, Sissel, plug your ears, she turns around, those sort of things. But what's so beautiful is that God knows us so well that he does those things for us all of the time. And so when you recognize that, it's just such a beautiful portion of your relationship with God. And having the daily prayer life is some way that I think you can better see those things, but you'll just see these little gifts. Like, for instance, I really love fall weather, and I've been, this is so silly, but like I really wanted to wear my little grandma sweater that I have on today, and I was waiting for cool weather, and then all of a sudden it happened just very suddenly, and I wasn't even like looking at the weather, and I'm like, oh my goodness, we have fall weather, like, thank you, Jesus. And that's just some of the little beautiful aspects of that relationship that you can see. So noticing those little things, like looking and knowing what your desires are and what things are in your mind. You may not have even like said, hey, Jesus, I would really like some cool weather. Maybe you have, which is awesome. But all of a sudden you see it and you go, wow, God did something I didn't even really ask for. Like, he knows me so well.
Right. It's such a great example to continue to look for signs of God's presence, because I think when you look for it, Sissel, they're all around us, even in small ways, like you said, not necessarily big ways, but just the fact that God is present, that he's watching out for us, maybe the fact that we have a guardian angel who's helping protect us as well. But I think when you do that, when you pray regularly, Sissel, and you're looking for little signs of God's presence, again, whether they're big or small, when you're on the lookout and you're aware of the fact that God is there, that he's ever present, you do tend to pick up on those. So I think that's a really great point.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And it really just, I don't know, it just adds so much fruit to your daily life, and also to just your spiritual life. Another thing I would say is that sometimes we don't always we withhold information, I think, in prayer. You kind of just are like, because we know that God knows, but the importance of actually saying how you're feeling and saying, what you want and what you desire, and being like, Lord, listen, your will be done. This is just like where I'm at. Because and sometimes when you're a little frustrated and you're just like, I don't understand why this is happening, or I don't, those sort of things. Because people are like, well, I don't ever want to. Sometimes we have this thing of like, don't be negative in prayer. There's a difference. We don't want to ever blame and put blame on God and, curse God. But it's okay to be like, hey, I'm frustrated, I'm upset, I'm sorrowful, I'm in mourning. Like those sort of things are really important, because and when you're in a relationship with someone else, your friend or sibling, parent, and you are upset with them, they're going to know. They know it. But how much better is it if you just come out and have that conversation rather than just like withholding it and just like, we're not going to address the elephant in the room.
That's right. Yeah. If you're feeling frustrated, just tell God, I'm feeling frustrated. Why not? You can't go wrong with that. God already knows it, and you're right. You might as well express it. Say what you're thinking, and ask God for His help as well.
And the last thing I would just say is that if you've never been done them, and again, it's not going to be for everyone, but if you've never done the Ignatian meditations, there's a couple different ones that St. Ignatius of Loyola kind of wrote out, and one of them is where you picture Jesus and talking to Jesus in a place that you're very comfortable and familiar with, and it very much shows just like that conversation you have with God. You can look the resources up online. That's something I definitely would recommend. And there's a quote from G.K. Chesterton that says, "Let your religion be less of a theory and more of a love affair," which is just something I think is really interesting and really beautiful, because, of course, we love to learn about our faith, and we love to know. The church does a beautiful job of compiling this information that has been gained through prayer, but really it comes down to our relationship with God.
Very good.
Yeah, so this week, look out for the signs and grab a picture of Jesus. Do whatever you need to do to work on that relationship.
Very good. A lot of great examples there, and a good reminder to continue our conversation with God on a daily basis. This has been Fruitful Living with Sissel Anderson. Sissel is also a producer for Back to the Father, which is Friday afternoons on YouTube as well. Our thanks to you, Sissel, as well. This ends wrapping up our first hour here on Morning Joy. We have a lot more to come, so stay with us here. Again, you're listening to Morning Joy.